Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sheldon. Thanks for the lovely introduction. What we are going to talk about today is basically on demystifying third-party risk management, and it's pretty linked to what was already covered today with Peter on supply chain risks. Quickly, the agenda would be as written above. The background and context would be basically on the regulatory landscape, how we are seeing regulations kind of pushing the companies to kind of work with these risks. Cost of failure, these would be kind of use cases which we've seen in the past where failure is something in line with what third parties have not met up to the expectations. And third-party risk management definitions. This is just kind of giving you an overview of what third-party risks are and how do we manage these risks from a definitions perspective. And the third-party risk management framework, this is an Accenture specific risk management framework, but the idea of this was to kind of help if companies on defining these the platform for ensuring these third-party risks are managed, understood, and effectively remediated. The third-party risk management controls and challenges and critical success factors. Without wasting any time, I would go on to the first point, which is the regulatory landscape. It would be a joke if I said no one over here heard about GDPR, but in this case, the GDPR is one of the most relevant regulation where it comes to managing third-party risks. And this is on this side, as you can see, the GDPR is making each and every company accountable to what not to the company which is supposed to manage these risks. Not only if you outsource your risks to your business services. So it is taken as an opportunity as well as a risk. But the idea of outsourcing is something which we cannot deny right now. With the number of connected systems, with the number of for a company to build and grow, it has to have a lot of third parties and vendors to manage these their services and achieve their business goals. But at the same time, we cannot outsource our risks. And that's one of the important aspects which we some of these, in my experience in doing audits, both in Baltics, India, Africa, it was seen that these risks are not managed to the level it's required. And we've seen this in many of these issues we've seen. So basically, the regulatory impact coming back to this is, it's definitely from the EU regulation. It's clearly defined by GDPR that it's needed. And you, as a company, have to manage these risks of third parties. US regulations are even more specific to say how these risks are to be managed of the third parties, and they clearly say as well that third party risks should be ensured and managed effectively. And this we can see in US Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, US Dodd-Frank Act, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and the US Office of Controller of the Currency. So OCC is also, so basically it gives a flavor that everyone is aware of these risks, but it's somewhat, it still needs to be kind of worked on. Basically the cost of failure, this is what I was speaking about, the impact of failures which we've seen in the past, and some of them is in line with the CIA triad, as you know, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. As we know, this is key for any kind of, if any of these three aspects fail, you as a it is a breach. So basically, we've seen this for RBS banks, Royal Bank of Scotland, who had an IT incident where banks customers were not able to kind of access their systems, and that had a big impact on monetarily, like 42 million, as we've seen that it has impacted them. Thomas Cook was an example of not only CIA, but it was actually the hotel chain that was employed by Thomas Cook had it was a failure on the hotel chain side, that this boiler tank which was outside burnt up, and 2 children had died. And this is the risk which is the human factor here, which is even more important. It's not only about someone's data being compromised, but lives compromised by, and it is falling on third party, and it gives an even more bigger impact. Then Universal Music Group. This was recently 2 months back. In June 2018, I mean, and this one had the Apache Airflow server, which was available over the internet, because the third party did not secure it effectively, and this was as we've seen, it's Honda was the affiliate, and the very famous target breach, which was the HVAC system, which was not secured. And this allowed the attackers to get into the POS environment, and allowing them to compromise and extract data of thousands of people. So basically, this gives you a flavor of how important third-party risks are supposed to be managed and effectively kind of fixed or controlled. We cannot fully fix it, but it's at one point at least you should have some control on it. So giving some key definitions, the third parties, I think one of the questions asked was, how do we manage fourth-party risks? Third-party risk also covers fourth parties and other layers, but in general, we all know this third parties are supposed to be, can be vendors, it can be suppliers, and it can be even government regulators. So in general, we have to ensure that whatever systems that are connected to our network, it is considered as a third party. The important aspect in my experience, I've seen that it's difficult to manage third parties, to get a list of companies who are third parties, and that's something which we've seen. I've seen companies are still struggling with this, to maintain a master list of third parties. For a small company, maybe it's easy, but for bigger, larger companies, it's still a challenge. Third-party risk management is about obviously managing risks, identifying and managing and monitoring risks associated with third parties, and providing competent oversight of the relationships. So this can be set out in the contracts, but in general, it's supposed to be even a bigger, at a more bigger scale. Third-party risk stratification. This is about segregating the third parties based on the risk levels. Let's say you're giving access to the company's payroll, would be a bigger risk for a company rather than bringing like a company who is giving you laptops or supplying you with IT infrastructure. So you kind of have to weigh and stratify which vendor is more important. The third-party risk management framework. So this is about a framework which is designed within Accenture, but it is definitely can be reused in general. The idea of the third party, as you can see, it's in the center, is the business as usual activities. So right from a vendor onboarding process, you have planning, due diligence, contracting, ongoing monitoring, termination. Right from the onboarding to the termination of the third party, controls have to be defined effectively to ensure that you onboard the vendor correctly, give him the correct access rights to the extent of monitoring him effectively, and as well as when you terminate the third party, you should ensure that there is proper handover processes in place. And this is something which sometimes goes unnoticed, and maybe the vendor still has access to your data and systems, even though he is not even part of the vendor of your to provide you services. So this is an important aspect, but then coming on to the second circle, which is the technology and change management. This is an important aspect as well, where it comes to giving access to vendors. It involves some changes which are, for example, if he needs additional access, how do you to remove accesses which are not required at this point. So in general, a proper technology and change management process has to be defined into the framework. Well, in general, the other aspects, which are the other circles around, these are processes which should be kind of on a normal assessment basis, but I will explain in general what are these aspects and how it's important to ensure. But in general, the governance aspects have to be defined. Each company has to have their own process, own governance structure to manage risks, and this will help this framework to kind of work on. So the third-party framework, the program approach. So defining policies and procedures. This was also spoken in the last presentation as well. But defining policies and procedures, which is just adding a right to audit clause in your policies, will not really help. And this is something which involves also defining how often will you audit the third-party vendor. What kind of processes you will ensure that they are following. For example, how are they meeting your policy requirements? And that's something which is sometimes neglected, and it's not defined very correctly, and maybe this is something which could be worked on. Defining risk classification methodologies. As I said before, defining a qualitative and quantitative approach in defining a risk classification methodology will help meet these requirements. So when it comes to defining to ensuring to which vendor will be more higher risk rated risk will define exactly how will you kind of work with these vendors. Defining a performance management. So this involves assessing which risks are higher and which risks of a vendor would be kind of even more riskier vendor. So this will also be an important aspect. Develop third-party risk management templates. Now this involves assigning risk categories and templates to assess which vendor you would like to kind of work with. So for example, the same risk will not work with a vendor who's providing you hardware, for example. You would have to kind of work with different master risks for those companies who are vendors who's accessing your data, and basically even your company's employees' personal data or your customers' personal data. The risks, so these are typical examples of third parties, and it goes even to more, but most of these are more from a bank's perspective, but as well as it could be in line with others. But in general, the vendors which we speak of in normal parlance, it's the cloud vendors, and these are mostly the highest risks which we have seen in the past. The cloud, as an example, in one of the audits which I had carried out in the Baltics, there was one service provider which was a data center service provider that did not. So we went for a visit, and it was this provider did not record our in the visitors register that we entered, and in general, the client who we were supporting for this supplier was shocked that this provider is a well-known name, but did not note the person's names or the visitors who attended who had gone to see the data center. So this allowed us access to everything. So these are some examples from a physical security side, as well as from a non-physical security, like a logical access. There was risks like the third party did not have, it was an internet-facing system, and it had allowed only one character passwords. This kind of it was interesting, but this was still a third-party vendor, but controls need to be defined effectively to ensure that these are controlled. Some of the top risks, and these are risks just to say that when you're defining your framework, you have to ensure that you have to ensure that business continuity and resiliency is defined in the process when you are selecting a vendor, and these are important aspects which you have to consider. So business continuity, information security, privacy, physical security, reputational risks, like we've seen in the Thomas Cook, then subcontractor risks and financial risks. Right now, the less frequently considered risks are kind of dependency risks. And these risks are more of like if you have one single vendor and you're fully depending on him, what happens if he goes out of business? Then what are your steps to be taken? In this case, it should be considered and ensure that you are meeting. So legal and regulatory compliance, of course. Intellectual property rights, if you are giving your IP to them and they are managing this, it's important to ensure that you are controlling their risks and how they are maintaining your data. In general, I would say that security and data protection is one of the key aspects which right now are coming into force with GDPR. But in general, these are some additional risks which we could note. So the third-party risk. So this is an approach, and as I said, many companies are still struggling with identifying their single master source for vendors, and this is one of the aspects which. The first one is basically the total risk of. So the idea of what we can ensure that is taking the total inventory from various data sources. And this involves even getting it from the accounts, finance, to ensure that we are not missing out on any vendors. If we miss out on certain vendors, it obviously entails a risk that we have missed out. So it's important first to get a list of all the vendors from all sources and all subsidiaries as well, because in that sense, it was also I've noticed that it was neglected. Then begin with this, and then you remove categories with low spend. For example, systems or vendors that you do not spend too much money on would mostly entail low risk vendors. So basically, it's something which can be defined there, that you ensure that these low category vendors are removed from your overall population, and risk assessment criteria should be applied to these low risks, basically to ensure that once these low risk vendors are removed, you have the more critical and high risk vendors which you can definitely focus more on and apply the audit methodology. Now coming to the audit methodology, one of the effective strategy which we have assessed was that if it's a high-risk vendor, you would typically do a on-site assessment rather than a self-assessment questionnaire being sent. So what we typically do is we go to the system, to the vendor and assess their controls. How, for example, if it's a payroll processing company, we go there and assess how are they managing their physical paper data. So this is more like if we see if they are not shredding their data or which is not required, then their paper system. So if they are not shredding it gives that they are not really protecting the data. And in general, we've seen this for an R&D company as well, where the design documents were kind of not shredded and thrown in dump, And if this was, we also seen that we could join the data and the papers and get this get a whole design document effectively. So it's important to ensure that these controls are defined effectively to ensure that that you categorize these vendors. Basically, the common third-party inventory data attributes. This is the key aspect which should be considered is defining the third-party name, third-party parent associated third parties, which is the fourth parties in general, and product or service if it's a goods or service, and then if it's a third-party type, what is he providing you, and is he a partner, and what is the spend. So this also involves, if it's a high-risk, high-spend vendor, he is obviously going to be a high-risk company, which is going to be providing you these services. So then business lines or processes supported by the third party, country or region where the third party operates. Depending on that, the countries that will have will be responsible for where the regulations may differ in those countries. Contract date and results of the third-party classification, which this is like if you have done a self-assessment for this company, then it's important to ensure that you have this data available, and results of the third-party risk assessments. If it's a cloud service provider, typically you would not go and like a Microsoft. You would typically get a SOCR report, which is a Service Organization Control Reporting report. This is a very detailed report that gives you the risks and controls that are in place. And as a company, if you can rely on these reports, but it should be also included in the contract that they provide you this report on a regular basis. So this is something which could be a tip for larger vendors. Then I would quickly move on to the challenges and critical success factors. The comprehensive, the challenges which we have seen in the past is, as I mentioned, the first one was having a comprehensive database of third-party vendors. I've seen a lot of companies, as I'm repeating it again, it is about they're struggling to have a comprehensive list. And if you don't have this list, it obviously it's important to have. So the idea to have it successful is to ensure that you have this success of the third-party risk management is to have a list, a comprehensive list. A comprehensive catalog of third-party risks is the second one, and this is about having a master list of all the risks that you would envision for a particular third party, so that you ensure that you do not miss on certain risks. For example, for ensuring that these risks are managed in a way that we are not missing out on any risk that a business process will be providing by the vendor. So if the vendor is providing you with a payroll service, and for example, or if he's providing you cloud services, you have to ensure that data is not commingled with other vendors. For example, if you are an LMT, you would not want your data to kind of merged with another third party, with another competitor. So how are they managing your data with others? So this is in ensuring that one risk will not fit all, and it depends specifically even for financial institutions and others. So that's one. Then risk-based segmentation of third parties. So this involves, of course, risk-based segmentation. As I said, it is about qualifying and ensuring that qualitative and quantitative vendors are managed. You have rule-based due diligence testing and ongoing monitoring. Now this involves as a regular process to ensure that rules are defined and ensure that you are performing this self-assessments and due diligence on a continuous basis for all your third parties. At least on a 6-monthly basis, you should have some process to send them assessments. And this could be a tool, or it could be more effectively, it would be a tool, but Excel files is also being used in general, but of course the tool would be a better approach. But then again, tools also have some disadvantages. I will come back to that. But governance and risk escalation framework, TPRM, in general, this is about having a specific owner in the company to who will handle risks in general. And this is typically taken by internal audit as the third line of defense. But in general, it should be a company-wide approach as a mature organization. And then you have integrated technology and MIS, which is the software tool which I was mentioning. And I've seen companies face challenges with a tool when it comes to flexibility of tools and defining risks in these tools, or ensuring that it is accessible to the vendors when you're doing self-assessments was a lot of challenges when you want to change. So it's important to have this tool very flexible if you're using tools, but it's definitely a step ahead. So I think, so this is all from my side, I guess, but yeah, I guess I would leave you with the note that it's important to ensure that this is a risk which is kind of neglected, but it should be a process to be in place which ensures that this is followed in future.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sheldon. A round of applause. And, of course, questions. Any questions? Yes, there is a question, but we don't have a microphone. I'll just pass you on the microphone, no worries.
Yeah. Question regarding the SOC report. Those reports, they are usually issued for the entire provider, for example, like Oracle. But then we as a customers, we don't get the service from this entire Oracle. We get probably from some particular unit, let's say something from UK or so. So basically, how we can extrapolate this overall conclusions towards a specific part of organization, and how big reliance or let's say assurance does this SOC report gives?
So since I was in a Big Four before this, and I was responsible for doing SOCR audits, that's a good question actually, and how do you rely on it? To be honest, if I'm if it's an SOCR report, it involves an independent review of the third party. So it involves it is giving the good side of the company. In your case, you said Oracle, but it's also giving you the controls that they are lacking on. It's basically as it said, it's an assurance report. It gives you as a company to kind of give almost full reliance on this report. What you can do after that is, as a company, is you can ensure that these controls are what kind of controls do you like, for example, if there is some data that they are managing and you find that there is a particular risk that you see there, you can ensure that you can put some pressure on them. They say that for example, if there is no data, how do you say, like if they're using same tables for all clients, for example, that was the risk. You can ensure that you put pressure on them to fix this, and you investigate. I would say this is a good report, and we've relied on it on most of our financial audits when I do these financial audits. And it's an independent report. It does not just give you the good side, but it also gives you the bad side of it. So I would say it's good.
Thank you for elaborate answer. A round of applause again for Sheldon.
Thank you.